Hey guys, I'm Camden, as you all know, and for my final video project, I'm going to be reframing my original argument that we did in the videos last week just a little bit. So, for this video, I'm still going to be focusing on Walt Whitman's poem of Him I Love Day and Night, but I'm going to be arguing not only about how he's using this poem to sort of show how male on male intimacy transcends earth and time and space, but more so focusing on how it is about a specific relationship with Peter Doyle. And I'm going to go into a little bit more background about their relationship. But first, I would like to read the poem. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to read it for you. Of him I love day and night. Of him I loved day and night, I dreamed I heard he was dead, and I dreamed I went where they had buried him I love, but he was not in that place. And I dreamed I wandered searching among burial places to find him, and I found that every place was a burial place. The houses full of life were equally full of death. This house is now. The streets, the shipping, the places of amusement, the Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, the Mannahatta, were as full of the dead as of the living, and fuller, oh, vastly fuller of the dead than of the living. And what I dreamed I will henceforth tell every person in age, and I stand henceforth bound to what I dreamed, and now I am willing to disregard burial places and dispense with them. And if the memorials of the dead were put up indifferently everywhere, even in the room where I eat or sleep, I should be satisfied. And if the corpse of anyone I love, or if my own corpse, be duly rendered to powder and poured in the sea, I shall be satisfied. So, some of my inspiration is based on Peter Doyle. That's what I want to argue about. I want to argue that him and 21-year-old Peter Doyle were in a relationship, and this is the poem that he used to express that love for him. And also, if you notice, there's a lot of talk about death, and I think that there was a little bit of fear of Peter Doyle dying because he was a soldier, and he was a soldier when they met. And so I think that that's what a lot of the death is referencing. His love is not only transcending life and death, but he's also a little bit fearful about what would happen if Peter Doyle died and if he could come to accept that, because of how close their relationship is. But I found this on Whitman Archives, and I also wanted to read this. And this is how Doyle described when him and Walt Whitman first met. So he said, "You ask where I first met him? It is a curious story. We felt to each other at once. I was a conductor. The night was very stormy. He had been over to see Burroughs before he came down to take the car. The storm was awful. Walt has this blanket. It was thrown round his shoulders. He seemed like an old sea captain. He was the only passenger. It was a lonely night, so I thought I would go in and talk with him. Something in me made me do it, and something in him drew me that way. I used to say there was something in me that had the same effect on him. Anyway, I went into the car. We were familiar at once. I put my hand on his knee. We understood. He did not get out at the end of the trip, in fact, went all the way back with me. I think the year of this was 1866. From that time on, we were the biggest sorts of friends. And I want you to keep in mind here is that the official published version of this poem was in 1867. So their relationship was kind of speculated to be around the 1860s, and they're saying they met 1866. I think there was speculation that they met a little bit before. So he is saying I think here, so it could be before then. Um but I think this is really important that Peter is saying this because I feel like we get a lot of information from Whitman based on Whitman's letters to people or Whitman's writing, but we don't get a ton of information from other people. So seeing him say, like, we were familiar at once, we understood, he went all the way back with me. We were familiar at once just seems so intimate, and it's like the whole love at first sight concept. Like, you're just like, you know someone, and it's a very special connection. And I think that ties into Walt's whole thing about adhesiveness and how important that is and how special that connection is. Um, but that was what I wanted to share with you. I also wanted to talk about there were some letters between the men, and in sometime between 1865 and the 1870s. So actually, this was 1869. So a little bit after, a few years after they had met, a couple years after this poem was published, Walt Whitman, wrote Peter Doyle a letter, and he said, "Dear Pete, I hope everything is going on favorably with you. I think about you every day and every night. I do hope you are in good spirits and health." So the poem is called Of Him I Love Day and Night, and I feel like that's a pretty glaring connection for him to write this poem, publish it, not say names, but be a little bit clear that he's talking about some sort of male on male intimacy, some sort of really special relationship, and Peter Doyle is someone that he's seeing at this time. You can kind of start to put two and two together, and the fact that he used that word, that wording every day and every night. I think about you every day and every night. That is so intimate, and to repeat that is, I feel like, a huge signifier that this poem is, in fact, about Peter Doyle and not just some potential relationship that he could have, because I think that you could argue that he's talking about a potential relationship because he switches from a man in his original manuscript to using him in his published manuscript. I think this is a pretty significant change because with man there's a distance and unfamiliarity, but then with him there is love and there is a realness. And again, I think you could potentially argue that he's describing this dream man or this man that he thinks he's going to meet and become intimate with, but I think it makes more sense, especially based on the letter and the background between him and Peter Doyle, that it would be about Peter because it's so much easier to write about someone that you are in connection with and not just this possibility in the future. He also changes houses to places, which I talked about in my original argument, and I just think that it's a much more expansive description and goes back to how transcendent their relationship is. And I think this is really important because there weren't a lot of gay men openly talking about this kind of relationship in the 1860s. Obviously, there was a lot more homophobia at the time. I mean, there's homophobia even today. So for Walt to come out and talk about that kind of thing in such intimate, beautiful language is in itself really important. But Houses to Places just becomes much more expansive, much more transcendent, like I said. And I think that that's also important to see that their relationship between him and Peter had no boundaries. It was limitless. It was interesting though because there was a critic's opinion, and he said that a celebration and condemnation of same-sex love, this poem charts Whitman's response to the homophobia of the day. The speaker reveals his pain and self-divided nature. He composes an elegy for his dream lover and for the democratic country that has lost its will to love freely. So he, I think, is essentially just arguing that it is a fight back against homophobia, and I do for sure think that it could be that, and I think that he is just in writing it by himself, even if he didn't mean to be fighting against homophobia, he is doing that just by publishing this work at the time that he did. But I think that the main reason is just to express his love for Peter Doyle, and I think that words words allow you to express so much, but I also think that Walt would probably talk about how he wishes that he could say more and he just couldn't reach that level because it transcends words. Their relationship transcends time, space. Of course, it transcends words. So he's explaining the relationship as best as he can. But that was my original question. My original question was asking if he was writing for a specific someone, or if you thought it was a more overarching poem in order to tackle homophobia, or some third option. And after looking at everybody's responses and some critiques of my argument, I wanted to really focus on the relationship between Walt and Peter, and I wanted to go more into the background on their relationship so I can really explain why I think this poem is a letter essentially to Peter Doyle from Walt. And so I'm answering my own question. I think it was about a specific someone. I think he is tackling homophobia by writing this, but I don't know if that was the goal in the front of his mind. I think the goal in his front of his mind was to express how much he loved Peter and to emphasize how transcendent this male on male adhesiveness is. And yeah, so I loved this poem. I hope you guys liked my interpretation of it, and I'll see you for part two of my video.